My parents originally came from India, then briefly were in Pakistan, then they kind of came to the UK because they were both doctors. I've embraced change and diversity because that's what I've grown up with. What we should be focused on really is making sure that diversity is viewed as a strength, not as a weakness.
We are lacking crossover funds, we are lacking later stage funds in Europe, and this deal basically seems like a pretty good case study.
I'm totally with you, and it's a very important point you pick up on there. Multiple billion-dollar companies and then multiple billion-dollar exits. We need more of that in Europe, and that needs scale capital.
I like your robust discussion.
And I mentioned the more like heated discussion. Try to keep it not too heated. I always try to be respectful.
Bienvenue to a new episode. I'm your host Philip, and on this show I'm interviewing the best Europeans in biotech to help you grow. One of the largest biotech investors in the world is actually from Europe, and that's Novo Holdings, the investment arm of the Novo Nordisk Foundation, who owns the pharma company Novo Nordisk. So I went to talk with Naveed Siddiqi, who is the head of European venture, and I met him here in San Sebastián. Lovely environment. Actually, I've known Naveed for several years when he was a partner at Andera. And he is a super sharp investor, but also very friendly and just open-minded. So we talked about what's really happening in biotech in Europe at the moment. And we also talked about his upbringing as a second-generation immigrant in the UK and the importance of diversity in biotech, especially in Europe. So here's my conversation with Naveed, and if you're enjoying it, please hit the like, follow, or donation button. All right, welcome to the show, Naveed.
Well, thanks for having me here. Very excited in this beautiful setting of San Sebastián. Can't complain.
Cannot do much better.
Yeah.
It's actually the first episode we do open air, so
oh wow,
you're the first one.
Fabulous.
Great. So I think you're one of the best in Europe to really have the macro picture from your role with Novo. So I want to start there. And you told me, like, despite the current market condition, you think Europe went from strength to strength, especially since 2012. Can you expand on this a bit? On what have you seen?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I've been doing this now for 24 years. So I've really seen how Europe has transformed over that period. I would say that I would characterize that period up to 12 as the jury was out about European life sciences and whether venture funds could make money here and whether biotechs could really kind of create transformational products and whether this model was viable. Whereas since 12, what I've noticed is that we have now a really vibrant ecosystem. The returns, which EIF has data on this, when they look back, are very comparable to the US.
Sure.
And we have really a lot of capital now compared to what the early years were. It's a transformationally different. So, and then we have new entrants coming in, not only from, our new funds here trying to raise, but also from the US as well. Now, I don't want to belittle the fact that we are in a bit of a downturn, so it's tough fundraising. Mm. And these LPs, I think they in Europe are sitting on the money, their hands, and they could make more of a bet, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But overall, it's a dramatically different environment to when we've had previous financial crises where I think it was looking very dicey in Europe.
That's interesting. I feel like even in the bear market now, it's almost better than in 2012.
Yes. The mood is better. There's more activity. We just saw some numbers from McKinsey this morning showing that European investment activity in 23 was quite substantial on the private side. So I think that's very good.
I'm curious on the timing. Current timing, especially as a company to fundraise. I mean, you mentioned it's a good time to invest. Yeah, there are good exits.
Yes,
and I mean, obviously, you guys at Novo is a bit different. Yes. I mean, the funds, how it's structured. Yeah. But I hear a lot of VCs, they've closed funds, they have funds. But what I hear a lot from operators is no, everyone is waiting. and they're all basically holding back or waiting for good terms. So I'm wondering, I mean, I think for you guys it's probably not the situation, but how do you see it, like, or working with, or when you co-invest? The people like actually wait?
No, so I think you're right. I think we're in a fortunate position because we have a lot of capital to deploy. We're putting away, last year we did 530 million. So we're very, very busy, and we are using this as an opportunity to, really add to the portfolio here, because we see a lot of good opportunity. But having said that, I would totally understand, and I see it myself in our portfolio companies, that it's taking longer to get things done. And I would attribute that to a few things. The most proximate to me is the fact that the U.S. public markets have mostly not been functioning. We had a little bit of a opening in December, January, where there's a bunch of IPOs went out.
X also.
XBI made a big move, and then there was a bunch of IPOs that got done. After February, it's been tough. So, but it really shows that little window we had. It shows it won't take too much to turn. And I think investors are needing a little bit of that positive momentum to deploy. And I think as soon as it comes back, I think deployment activity will speed up and increase. So I think it's a little bit that aspect that's holding things down, slowing things down a bit. It's not because of the pace of innovation or the differentiated innovation or data that's being written. I mean, the fundamentals of the industry are extremely strong. And I think my sense is that it's really the macro picture which is holding things back a bit.
Like the macro, even the macro non-biotech picture.
Yes, it's the interest rate picture, which is slowing public market investment. And I think it's, when we even look at the data today from the McKinsey did, there's very little follow-on. There's almost no follow-on financings in the European public markets. And in the US, where we look at NASDAQ, we've had strong quarters on the follow-on side, but it's tapered down a bit again because interest rate cycle expectations are that, they will be held higher for longer rather than, the rate cuts the market was expecting.
It's good to hear, actually, that it's let's say really macro, significant macro factor that when this get better, the rest is actually there. It's not like not a deeper crisis.
That's right.
Crisis.
That's right. Yeah.
Actually, it's not. I mean, you mentioned the 500 million figure. Which is crazy because, I mean, you're deploying this amount of capital basically every year, which is basically the size of a fund, let's say, the Jatos or Sofinova or Forbion's last fund, but they deploy that over, 7 to 10 years. So that's, you deploy it globally, but so I was and actually I saw a picture or a figure from Oppenheimer that Q4 2023, and I will show it, that you were basically the most active, you have invested the most life science investor globally, even more than like a RA Capital or Polaris or whatever.
And a very busy fourth quarter.
That's crazy.
Yeah. No, I think
I didn't even know you were like that. I mean, I knew you were big, but I didn't know you were like bigger than like even US funds. So it's like
I think it's interesting because we have a strategy which is quite broad, so we can do private and public, and we can also invest in IPOs, so when the markets are good on one, we can increase our weighting to that part. When the markets are, or if we think that something is very underpriced, part of the market is underpriced, we can increase our weighting there. Gives us a lot of flexibility. So we can make smart decisions from capital allocation perspective. I think coupled with that, I think we have a global kind of reach of deal flow. So we do see a lot, and we have the resources to deploy. So those combination of factors enable us to be super active when we want to be. We can be cautious when things are, going bad all around. But I think because we don't have any fund to deploy, it has to be deployed at a certain point. It's our own money. But in general, if you see our activity, it has ranged between 400 to 600 million annually over the last several years.
And how much was that in Europe? Or kind of
so Europe ends up somewhere between 15 to 20% of that.
Okay.
So we end up with kind of a reasonable chunk going to Europe, and I think that sort of mirrors really the level of deal activity we see overall. Yeah.
And how is it? So in the US, I guess, has a bigger chunk, I guess, more than 50%?
Yes.
Invest in US.
Yes.
And then I saw you were pretty active in Asia as well.
Yes.
Which I didn't actually know you were that active in Asia.
Yes. So Asia, it's not our team. There's a separate team that deploys Asia. So these numbers I'm talking about are just US and Europe.
Okay. So 80% US, 20% Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's about that much.
Which is basically roughly the market size if you compare from a market cap of the, let's say, US biotech compared to Europe biotech, I guess would be 80-20.
It tracks the overall ratios.
Yeah,
I just saw a ratio today that 20% of FDA approvals were coming from Europe.
Okay.
So it tracks.
That's good. Maybe while we are on Novo as well, what I find amazing is that it's basically, I mean, the Novo Holdings is basically with the Novo Nordisk tied to the Novo Nordisk Foundation, which owns a big chunk of Novo Nordisk and controlling rights. I think it's 70% of the voting rights.
Yes.
So basically, a lot of the dividends from Novo Nordisk goes to the foundation, and it's reinvested.
Yes.
And has been Novo Nordisk is massively profitable over many years. I mean, now even more with the GLP, etc. And it's almost too good to be true. I mean, it's like amazing. I mean, at least from outside, amazing research, amazing products, still keeping a market dominance, obviously a crazy expanding market, and then reinvesting. And even the reinvestment is very, I guess, the returns are there as well.
Yes.
It's kind of very positive feedback loop. And I'm always looking like I'm trying to look of, okay, what's like, not what's wrong, but if it's too good to be true, like where's the
chubby ointment?
And I don't find that much
we have basically at holdings level just grown the overall investment activities. So now it's venture growth, principal investments, bioindustrials, Asia. We have expanded the overall activities, not just people's health, it's planetary health as well. In the venture team, which is my team, which is just focuses on biotech.
And it's separate from seeds.
Yes. And it's a little bit later than seeds. So seeds is in the name. And also their geographic focus a little bit on the kind of making sure that can really grow the Danish ecosystem, where venture is kind of broader Europe and the US and later stage. So I think the bit that I think, where we have kind of been able to develop, I think, is a way that we invest, which has been trying to basically make sure that this flexibility that we have, being at Novo Holdings, to play both private and public, and to make sure that we understand how these companies evolve from an early to later stage, and then be able to invest anywhere along that paradigm, I think is a very powerful equation, because it allows us to follow a story from its inception and have that ability to consider it at that time or consider it a later point or a later point. And sometimes that strength gives us a unique insight, because we have this corporate memory of understanding the development of something, and also a vantage point of understanding how this is developing against other stories elsewhere. So it has resulted in us finding opportunities that have had a reasonably high hit rate from an M&A perspective as well as IPO. So for the last...
You mean this explains the performance of Novo Holdings, basically?
Exactly. So up to 21, we were super active in the taking companies public. So I think we had 17 NASDAQ IPOs between 2020 and 21.
Wow.
And then since then we've had in 21 6 M&As, in 20, and then we had another 5 last year, and then we've had 2 already this year. So the M&A aspect has been a very important driver to our performance since then. So we run a portfolio of about 80 companies. Europe, US, try to pick the best of the breed, follow them over a long time. And then having this flexibility in our model is also, I think, a strength.
And one of the exits I want to discuss Amolet more in detail is just after that. One thing, still staying on this like too good to be true. The only thing I kind of see, and I kind of want to, I mean, challenge is a big word, but discuss it. The only thing I see is that most of the cash basically comes from Novo Nordisk, and comes from diabetes and now obesity, which obviously a very tragic disease and growing, but are mostly environmental cost, at least 80-90%. And what I'm wondering is like, basically, is it as a society the best way to prevent or to treat or to manage the disease to give pretty expensive insulin or GLP-1s versus preventing? Obviously would be less revenues and less profits for Novo Nordisk. And I know Novo as a company, and I was surprised about this, that even 1% of your annual turnover goes to prevention, actually. Which I think is one of the only pharma company doing so. But I'm still wondering, like, is it not, I mean, more like, is there not a way to do, like, better / should Novo Nordisk revenues be actually, should they be a bit lower if we prevented or fixed the problem earlier?
Of course, as a huge societal question, I think prevention, of course, has to be the way forward as much as possible. And I think the challenge is, how does that get funded and how does that happen? And I think the way we could think about it is that basically the profits that Novo Holdings generates through what Novo Nordisk gives ultimately goes to a not-for-profit. And that not-for-profit, the Novartis Foundation now is one of the largest foundations in the world. And they are really thinking about the prevention agenda and also how to kind of manage diseases and prevention better access, and trying to support that agenda as well as supporting, what's coming next in terms of, moving through quantum or stem cell research, right? Moving to kind of really finding real cures for diseases, right? Where there's been a degenerative aspect to it, and really supporting that. They set up a 200 million grant for a stem cell research center in Denmark. They've just done on quantum, just getting better insights into disease. So I think that part of the equation, I think, is a foundation agenda. And I think our job is the here and now, because we have a lot of disease to treat as well. That has to be dealt with as much as the prevention agenda. So I think we're trying to sort of see how can we do it profitably, so the foundation has then the resources to then also advance the prevention agenda.
That's I like it. Maybe going to you mentioned some exits. So Amolet, I think it was it's end of last year, or is it already this year?
It was this year.
This year already.
In March.
In March. Okay.
April.
So then it's this. I mean, it was Lyon, France-based company. Above $1 billion deal. Total biobucks, 800 billion upfront, which is at least to my knowledge, I think it's the largest upfront I think ever in France, or at least
maybe the second after Advanced Accelerator. Really farm.
I mean, it's impressive.
It is impressive.
It's and you guys, and I've seen actually the Series C with Sophie Noah coming in. But I didn't know you guys were leading the Series A actually. Which is even more even more impressive. Can you tell a bit more like on how you came to invest in the Series A and like
So this is I think this is a great story for Europe, by the way, and it really shows. And why do I say that? Because this is a story where the technology actually came from the US, from out of the MGH in Boston. And
that's why they were invested. Okay, no.
But the company got built by a serial entrepreneur in Lyon.
That's
France, and Thierry Abriba, who has sold to other companies previously, and he brought his team on very quickly, got it up and running very quickly 4.5 years ago. That's when we came in alongside him. around it with some mouse data saying they may have a differentiated product for hyperparathyroidism and be the second to market after another one that's just ahead of them, which is up for approval now. So I think it was a European syndicate that a significant Series A financing. We co-led it with the EQT guys, and lots of other investors came in, a mixture of French investors who would be there earlier at the seed, but then they came in the A, and then kind of really trying to build a pan-European syndicate to kind of enable that advancement into the clinic. And then successive rounds, then next one by Andera in France, leading it, and then later on Sofinnova coming in for the Series C, leading that last year. And then this year the company is being sold in phase 3, having delivered very exciting phase 2 data, but in 4.5 years, superb execution, moving something very early to that point. And really backed by overwhelming majority of European investors, and I think that's a great story. We advanced the company from a very early stage, successive rounds of financing, all the way we were funded to approval. Now we were preparing to launch, raise more money to launch it, and then we got the corporate interest. So I think it's a nice message to show that we can do it here in Europe.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to at least the syndicate pick my interest because I think you have managed to gather, I think, almost all French VC in a single company, which I think I've never seen. Because being French and knowing them, they are always they don't like each other too much. They coexist sometimes, but let's say Andera and Sofinnova, it's quite rare to see them really on the deal together.
Sure.
So here, you had both of them. Yeah. And Kurma invested as well, I think.
Yeah.
And then
BPI.
BPI. But BPI often every French, every French biotech almost. But and then even Orbimed invested and Pontifax as well. It's pretty great. And obviously you guys, plus some other investors. I want to ask, how did you manage to to get them all and all friends on the board? But I guess it worked well.
Well, the asset matters. I think the asset was very interesting. The management team matters. Thierry Abriba, if those who met him, is a experienced CEO. Maintains great relationships with all the investors. And has been really somebody who people can feel confident about executing well. Okay. And then, the investors who kind of came in, I think also very experienced in later stage, clinical stage opportunities, because it became a clinical stage opportunity. And there, the Sofinnova growth folks, I think, that's their focus. It was nice to have them there with the capital available to participate and really help us shape that last round. So I think those are all the factors that kind of come in to it, and I think we've benefited from seeing that sort of early interest from the local French smaller investors, and then the bigger ones with the bigger funds kind of come in later.
That's right. Actually, your last comment about the crossover. Not just to complement Sofinnova, but I think it's one thing that I heard a lot, let's say from 2015 to 2020 is always we are lacking crossover funds, we are lacking later stage funds in Europe, and this deal basically seems like a pretty good case study for a crossover fund.
I'm totally with you, and it's a very important point you pick up on there. We've had we've said, there's a funding gap at the very early stage. True, but there's also has been, and there is still a significant gap at the later stage. And when public markets are not active in the US, companies don't have the access to raise and dream about being, raise those hundreds of millions and to kind of go public and maybe launch drugs, right? Like we have many examples of US companies who didn't get bought, but they launched and there have been successful launches and they are now multi-billion dollar.
After launching and then
multiple billion dollar companies and then, multiple $billion exits. We need more of that in Europe, and that needs scale capital. And it's great to see funds like, the Software Growth folks there, but also now, we have the folks at Gilda. We have the folks at Forbion, and they've been dedicated funds raised now to do kind of growth capital, what would be classified as growth capital, where there is kind of a POC, and then you can sort of fund them to the next level.
Yeah.
And Novo is very happy to kind of come alongside those groups and really sort of help that piece. Now, have we got enough? I don't think so, because we have as we just saw, and I mentioned, there was nothing raised for public European companies, in this last quarter. It's absolutely terrible for their ability to raise money. And I think that's a real gap that Europe has to address. And it's been a real failure, and we will not be able to succeed if we are totally dependent on all our companies attracting U.S. investors, going to NASDAQ. We should be self-sufficient here on the public markets as well if we want to really create the future leaders of tomorrow. So this is something
at least having options, I guess.
Absolutely. And so we need some of this capital, which is not investing locked up in pension funds, insurance fund companies, to kind of somehow get directed or allocated, or maybe the EIB through its policy measures, how it's helped with the venture funds, help create that sort of later group of specialist investors who can really carry these companies forward to the next level. And then we can actually then have, the future Gileads here in Europe as well. So,
That's good. It's good you mentioned the pension funds as well. I mean, when we talked about this discussion, you said it's mostly a policy problem.
Yes.
And I'm curious about this. What do you mean? And how much is it a policy versus let's say return? I mean, if the returns are so good as you mentioned in funds, why are European pension funds not investing more in funds?
Yes, I think the problem is at sort of two levels. One, there's a lack of understanding of what biotech is, because I think it seems very risky. All this funny jargon we use, the terminology, it's very hard for a non-specialist to access and understand what he's investing in. So that's one serious problem, which is inherent to our sector. But it doesn't stop the US guys doing it, right? So US journalists do invest in the sector. Why is it that we don't? So I think there's a risk problem as well. And I think Europe has still developing its equity culture and risk-taking culture. And I think there's a market failure. I could only characterize as a market failure because now this industry has been going for, 25 years plus, 30 years, right? And there's a clear track record. EIF has the numbers, and yet we're still having difficulty for LPs or institutional money really kind of allocating these very large pools of capital to risk. And so I think that market failure has to be addressed at a policy level. And that is where I think more work needs to be done in Brussels and, in London. And I think that there is some activity that's happening there. I think there's some recognition from the politicians that this has to be addressed. We have the TB initiative in France, and we had a Mansion House speech in London around it. I think we're at that juncture where we need to build some momentum here and really see some real actions being taken, which will have a consequence for the next 20 years for European life sciences. If we truly want to have life sciences as a core pillar of growth in Europe, we cannot do it without addressing the capital gap at the expansion level. So
it's crazy. Because as you said already throughout the interview, I mean, if you have like track records and you have return multiples, I mean, as a pension fund, that should be the most important metric.
Yes.
Not like understanding how to do drug development. I don't know. I mean,
yes, I think there's some rules also that get in the way, also around how they match, assets with liabilities and all those things. So
I think they're trying to evaluate their own risk level.
Yes, exactly. So, and how they allocate what level of risk they're willing to underwrite.
Yeah.
So I think this is something that can be addressed. We've had two big moves at a policy level, which had a profound impact on the shape of Europe we see today. One is the EBRD setting up with Eastern Europe and integration into Western Europe, right?
Yeah.
That was like a huge policy move. Imagine if that hadn't been put in place, right? What that would have what we would be living into now. And then I think the second part, which is more specific to our sector, was the way that the EIB set up in the 2000 timeframe to support venture funds in tech and life sciences, and seeded these VCs who were a cornerstone initiative.
They seeded almost every, at least every biotech fund, I think, has EIB.
They have
as an LP.
massive. I think it's, they have a statistic around it. It's like 90% of it or something like that. So it's and we have the venture industry. The reason we started off this conversation was around how it's positive today. If they hadn't done that, I don't think the private sector. We know that for a fact they would not have stepped in because they're still struggling to step in now. So they certainly would have not stepped in then. We would not be having this conversation here sitting in Europe. So it is important. It is something that has to be addressed, and it is important that now policymakers really pay attention to this and fill the gaps in. Yeah.
If some policymakers are listening, do your research or reach out.
Yeah.
Maybe one last thing, a bit on the macro level.
Yeah.
You touched on it when we talked about bringing all the syndicate of AMOLED, and on the board level, and that's. The people were like getting along.
Yeah.
And I think, and we discussed it before, biotech is still a people game. Obviously, you have scientific data and everything, but still, I would say 50+% of the success is people.
True.
Can you I'll talk a bit about it, of why is it the case? How you apply it in your investments, how you filter out, or you mentioned even within the fund or within the company, there's some people you will work more with and not.
So AMOLED is a great case. I think this was a story where there was an incumbent drug, and you had to differentiate the drug, and convince investors that you're going to have a differentiated story. Right? Because you need to raise money. Investors are very focused on, do you have a differentiated drug? And then there are people who are willing to give you some backing and willing to give you lots of rope, and others who want to see, results today or tomorrow, right? And you have that in all those discussions in a broad church like AMOLED had of lots of investors, right? And you do have people who have different perspectives around that.
10 more people on the board.
It's a big board.
It's a big
right?
board, yeah.
I was like, are we going to be able to navigate this? So I think, but we did. And I think the reason I think it worked was not because people held back and didn't express their views. I think what was, what observation for me from the AMOLED case was the role that the CEO played. And also the chair played, and also a little bit of sophisticated investors, making sure that they're listening as much as they're talking in the room.
2 years and 1 mouth.
Yeah. I think you need both. You have two faculties, you should use both. And I think we saw a good example of that being used. And yes, we had to make some important strategic decisions. It was a robust discussions at times where we were not fully seeing eye to eye. And I think it needed, but what was important was I think everybody was trying to aim at the same goal, right? Yeah. Which was, we want to make sure that we can raise good money, we do the right experiment, and we can show the right differentiation, and we have the best team possible, that we recruit the best team possible to do that. And we cannot do this on a shoestring. You need to have a reasonable amount of resources to do this. And you need to build a story that will appeal to a international audience, right? It will also appeal to US investors, etc., as well as European investors. So I think we were looking for all of those things. We had an opportunity maybe to think about going public earlier. There were sort of situations when the markets were very strong. I think there was a big push to try to take this public as part of that wave. I think there was quite a lot of discussion around that because some of us were a little bit weary about a French company that didn't have data trying to go public on NASDAQ and what that outcome might have been. I think it would have been tough if we had done that for various reasons that didn't go as some people wanted it to.
I guess it's the right
but ultimately the decision was right and the outcome was right. But we had a robust discussion at that time around it. And yes, you have in management who have a
I like your robust discussion. I can imagine the more like heated discussion.
We try to keep it not too heated, but it can be. But I always try to be respectful. I think very, very important that these are never. There's no really ever a right or wrong answer. These are judgment calls, right? And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, and we just hope that we can build enough coalition to whatever we think is the majority view and kind of just get it there. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Maybe just before moving to your personal background, I just want to mention one thing, which I think we've discussed and which I think illustrates also well where the European ecosystem is now. And we've literally three biotechs now that are worth 20 billion plus.
Yes.
Argenx, Genmab, BioNTech.
Yeah.
And on our call, you even said BioNTech was at like 80 billion.
Yes.
I mean, and I think some people don't even realize or know. I mean, even myself, I talked with Sander from Forbion and I thought, Argenx I thought it was still at 10 billion.
Yeah.
Actually, they doubled.
Yes.
So I think it's also important to mention, like, just looking at the market cap.
I think it's super impressive.
Even Bahija from Immunocore. Nicole, I mean, I think they're, I would say, number 5 in Europe, but I mean, 3 or 4 billion.
We should celebrate our successes.
Amazing.
We should talk about them more. We should make sure people are aware because, maybe as an industry, what we're doing a bad job is actually talking about our story.
Yeah.
And, we're Europeans. One of the things that we always criticize ourselves is that we're not good storytellers, right? Actually, we have a fantastic story to talk about. And it's something that we should sharpen our act.
With a great podcast to highlight it.
Yeah, thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Little self-promotion. No, I agree.
Yeah.
No, it's great. Maybe, so moving to personal background, and we have 10 minutes left.
Sure.
One thing that also strike me, or your personal background, you're second generation immigrant. Your parents are from India/Pakistan.
Yeah, that's right.
And you grew up in the UK.
Yeah.
And you told me you're like, I'm curious. I mean, we discussed it, but I want to hear it again for the audience. Like, how was it? To grow up as a second generation immigrant?
Yeah.
How was it, especially in the life science industries as ecosystem throughout your career? Yeah, maybe starting with that.
No, thank you. So look, my parents originally came from India, then briefly were in Pakistan, then they kind of came to the UK because they were both doctors.
Yeah.
And so I had that early science and medical background. They were professionals. They came to really work in the national health system in the UK. I was born in the UK, and then UK is my home, and I'm European at heart. So that's kind of my sort of top level journey. I must say that the journey for me personally has been where I've embraced change and diversity because that's what I've grown up with. My parents came from a very different culture, from a very different setting, and still going into their world and to their parents' world as a young child, seeing how different that was to being in Europe was also very, I learned that I had 2 parts of my brain which I had to kind of switch gear, which I'm sure happens maybe if you're French and German and on the border, you have to start thinking like a French person and a German person. It was a bit like that. So I grew up with that sort of diverse as my sort of DNA in my upbringing.
I had that, but probably less strong than, I guess, India
and Europe.
Yeah, I guess
yes,
a bit more differences.
Difference in religion, difference in language, difference in culture, lots of differences, and being able to do that. But it made me very at ease with that. So I feel that's a huge privilege I've had. The second privilege I have had, which I think is something that anybody who comes from a bit of a, parents were professionals. So we already have a privileged position because we're coming from that section of middle class society, which has some advantages, has certain values, certain thinking. So that's, I think, is common. That's not, whether it's in India, whether it's in Pakistan, whether it's here, that's a common value that we have. So there's no much diversity there. So in a way, I had these two different countervailing forces. My career has been where I've felt very much at ease and I've actually embraced diversity. So I've worked for, Greeks, Japanese, French, and now the Danes. And then, but UK is my home base. And I've also done a lot of investing in the US as well. So, and now I work with a firm that's a very US, Europe, Danish kind of, UK, Dane and US kind of culture. So I have to sort of be able to navigate all of that. And there are differences. We should respect our cultural differences and what we're good at culturally and what maybe our weakness spots are. Mm-hmm. And I think it's powerful to have that sort of vantage point. Now, the challenges and difficulties, I think I would say that in Europe, I've grown up in an age where people have welcomed ambition, talent, skill, and where you come from and what the color of your skin has been something that's been going in the rear view mirror, and then something that's been in how people define people.
And the trend has been very good, very progressive towards.
Yes, that exactly. So I felt that has been I've been fortunate to have that as a tailwind. And I've never felt there's been a challenge. But I can't say that this is my experience is a definition of what everybody else has faced. It can be that, and I'm aware that we still have issues where, discrimination or there might be equality, but lack of equity that kind of comes through in how people are promoted or how people are seen. So I don't want to belittle other people's experiences, and I think that is a factor, and we should be striving to change that still, so we have a more equitable society. But I think what we should be focused on really is making sure that diversity is viewed as a strength, not as a weakness. And there's been some talk, quite a lot of political talk, which tries to go away from that. And I would just urge people who are undecided to think about that and think that, is it something that is realistic to think in a world that's so globalized, so interconnected, whether that's the right way to think about the future?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I think I'm curious on because at least from my view, I feel like the UK are a bit ahead compared to the rest of Europe in terms of diversity and in terms of valuing ambition and whatever strengths you have.
Yeah.
Did you feel it? Like, or do you feel it in your like?
Yeah. Well, I work for a French firm, and they welcomed me, and I didn't experience that. So in the UK, and they're definitely not in Denmark either. We have Kasim, who's our CEO. He has UK, but he also has that sort of same second generation background. And then in the UK, I would say I haven't really experienced it. Within the health service, within the research groups, I think there are lots of great role models and examples for the next generation that's coming up to see that, there are people can be successful in that environment and succeed. And I think that's very positive. And I think that's something that's an achievement which you can all pat ourselves on the back of for as society as a whole. And in the rest of Europe, yes, maybe, in some environments, I'd like to see more female participation. I think the numbers are terrible there. We just had the statistic of 11% only of CEOs are female in life sciences. That's not good. Why is that? I mean, we need to change that. So So that's not good. I think there are areas where I think our inherent natural biases are coming into play, and whether it's probably subliminal, subconscious, but how we're making decisions, maybe there is something coming there. So I think we have to keep an eye on that one. Yeah.
And I guess as with every trend, I mean, there's a time factor.
Yes.
To these kind of changes as well.
Yes.
I like it. I like the global message. I think we can wrap up here.
Yeah, great.
I mean, thank you. It was amazing. I mean, amazing story, personal story, company story, great successes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and really appreciate in this beautiful background.
It was not too hot.
It did rain.
It was not too hot.
Yeah. So it was nice.
Great.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All the best.
Thanks for listening to the end. I'm impressed by how Naveed is a big believer of European biotech and how much capital he's deploying and how much Novo is deploying, but while still doing it in a smart and an effective way. I also really like the diversity part and think that European biotech ecosystem would benefit, and European society as a whole would benefit from way more diversity. So if you've also enjoyed this episode, please hit the like, follow or review button. Any of these actions would help a lot. And I would also be curious to hear what you think. So if you could just leave a comment wherever you are down below, or send me an email at philip@flot.bio. All right, see you in the next episode.